Welcome, I'm Dulwa Kowa, and you're listening to Dear Diaspora. Dear Diaspora exists to host Africa-centered conversations about all things business, culture, and more. Join me and guests as we ask the big questions, challenge narratives surrounding Africa, learn and unlearn, and explore what a more connected, collaborative, and engaged African diaspora can look like. It feels so good to be back. Thank you for tuning in to this very special episode of Dear Diaspora. A quick life update. I finally got to go to Ghana to complete the rest of my Princeton in Africa Fellowship. I lived and worked in Accra, Ghana for about 3 months and had a phenomenal time there. It was actually really hard to leave, so stay tuned for the next episode, which will be a deep dive into my time in Accra, the good, the enjoyment, as well as some of the challenges I experienced while living there. For today's episode, though, you don't want to miss this amazing conversation I had with Alice Mills-Mai. She's a licensed mental health counselor, researcher, entrepreneur, and proud daughter of Ghanaian immigrants. We first connected about a year ago, and I thought she'd be the perfect person to speak about the importance of destigmatizing mental health in African immigrant communities. During the episode, we discuss her journey becoming a mental health professional after realizing nursing wasn't for her, why there's still so much shame surrounding mental health in many African immigrant communities, healing practices inherent to many African cultures that we may not regard as mental health practices when they actually are, immigration itself being a traumatic experience. Towards the end of the episode, she actually answers a few questions that were submitted anonymously. So thanks to everybody that submitted questions for this episode, and thanks again, Alice, for your super thoughtful responses. Without further ado, here is our conversation. Alice, thank you so much for being a guest on Dear Diaspora. I am so excited to have you.
Thank you for having me, and hello to your listeners as well.
Absolutely. Super excited for this very important conversation. And so before we dig into anything else, I'd love to just get to know you a little bit better. I know you're the, proud daughter of Ghanaian immigrants. I'd love to hear what your upbringing was like and where, you grew up and all that.
Okay. Yeah. So, in addition to being a daughter of immigrants, I am an immigrant myself. So, I grew up in Ghana, spent up until high school. Yeah, I finished high school, did a little bit of college also in Ghana. So, before I came here. So, I basically came to America as an adult. So my immigrant story is different from other folks who may have come here as children or full adults, but I came here as a young adult and then went to school here, did almost all my education, undergrad, grad, and then now finishing up my PhD. Yeah.
Did you know, when you started going to college here, did you know you wanted to become a therapist or?
No. So when I first came here, the advice or the well-intentioned advice that everybody gave me was, oh, be a nurse, which I think it's similar to a lot of advice that people may get, that you get the advice to be a nurse because for most immigrants, money is the thing. So thinking, oh, nursing is the guaranteed way. So I started really college to be a nurse, or started on that pathway. And then kind of we had my family and I went through a tragedy. My grandmother was sick, going through cancer, going through hospice. And then we kind of had like a social worker who helped us through that time. And so it was really interesting for me to have that experience, even though it wasn't really therapy, but kind of the social worker was there to kind of prepare my family and I for my grandmother's death and all of that. So that was really interesting to, even for somebody to prepare a family for death, because to me, that was something that we never do or we never talk about. So In the midst of that, I failed one of my nursing classes. And for me, that was the first time I failed a class. So I was like, I am not doing this again, or I am not retaking this class again. So I was like, okay, what can I do in the meantime? So I was like, okay, in the meantime, I've had this experience with a social worker. I liked my psychology classes. So let me just finish this undergrad in psychology, and then we will see what I can do with that, or what I can, where I can go from there. Maybe I will come back to nursing, or maybe I would do something else. So I took those psychology classes, graduated in psychology, and then I realized I really liked it. So I was like, okay, so what are some of those careers? So my career path is really different versus that wasn't my intention. I really kind of developed a career in it, or in the moment. So I was like, okay, what can I do with psychology, or what are the pathways? Because when I had my undergrad, a thing that I didn't know is with psychology, you have to have like a PhD in order to practice. So I was like, oh, so this is something that I didn't know. I didn't know anything about. I was like, okay, what is kind of the short way to do this? And then there was, I did the research. There was mental health, all of that. So I was like, okay, I'm going to take the mental health pathway, which is similar to psychology. So I did that. And then that has been it, practicing and all of that. Made a business out of it, and it's been great for me. I know a lot of time parents worry about money, and even me as an immigrant and other immigrants, we worry about money. But I can say it's it's been a great career, and I'm able to live comfortably also out of it. Yeah.
I mean, I'm definitely glad to know that you were led to do this work because it's so important.
Hmm.
And I love that your focus is specifically on working in immigrant communities,
Hmm.
and then just communities of color in general,
Yeah.
and making like therapy more accessible.
Hmm.
Before we dig into more of your work, I'd love to know like what your parents thought of you pursuing this path. Were they okay? Were they skeptical?
Yeah. They were skeptical, and I think even now they still don't get the gist of what I do. That I'm always explaining things to them. So now they're still like, "Oh, are you saying you just talk to people and they pay you?" And I'm like, "No, that's different." And they're like, "Are you people's friend?" I'm like, "No, it's really different. Like what I do, I talk to people, help them figure out their thoughts, help them, achieve their life goals and stuff like that." So now it's still a learning in progress for them. But in the beginning, of course, they were worried, that am I going to get money? Am I going to make money out of it? And kind of now they see that, okay, I'm okay. I'm able to live comfortably. So they are not worried about that aspect of it. But now they're still like, okay, what are you doing, or what do you specifically do? But it's also great to see some of the other members of my family really embracing mental health. And sometimes we have some of those conversations, even with my parents. I'll be like, okay, why are you doing this? Or this is what you're saying, this is how it's affecting this person. Even some of the things that they will say, I'll be like, have you thought about how this may affect the person? So I am one person that they are always cautious about. They'll be like, oh, Miss Mental Health is here. Let's be careful of what we say around here. We don't want to say the wrong things around there. But I'm like, that's good that you notice that you cannot say anything, or there are some things that you cannot say. So yeah, I still a learning in progress for them. Yeah.
Wow, wow, Miss Mental Health. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
But I would imagine that would be the response in at least the average, immigrant family. I'm sure
Hmm.
my mom would be just the same. What would you say is like a recurring sort of theme, like when you are in, our communities essentially?
Mm.
Like, why is there such
Yeah.
a resistance?
I would say one of the things is there is a lot of shame around mental health. And then when you mix culture and religion, it becomes really difficult. And this is so layered. So, first of all, mental health is seen as this Western or Americanized thing, because, of course, because of colonization and all of those things, that healing practices in Africa were not really kind of valued. That now it was like, oh, this Western way of healing or this Western way of taking care of ourselves, that's what values. So that made devaluing African practices or African healing practices. But when you go into African communities, the practices of taking care of yourself, they are still there. They may not have the name of mental health. I use an example of in Ghana, the way we grieve. It's a long process, but it also acknowledges the fact that healing is really, it's not like a destination where you can get to and you're done. So there is a 1 week process. There will be a funeral. It's also a time of celebration. There is like a 40-day process. During like the festivals, there is the day of the death where people remember the death. There is a 1 year process. So it's really this drawn out process of grieving or healing that gives people space to heal or make healing like, okay, we have to heal, or this is okay. So there are those practices. As saying like it takes a village to raise a child. Again, it helps mothers because postpartum is real, and it also acknowledges that one person cannot raise a child by themselves, that it takes a whole group of people coming together to support a mother to raise a child. So all of those things are already there, but really look the Western way where we talk about it, this is mental health, maybe it may not really have the name of mental health, then it kind of overshadows it. And the other one is also with religion and then cultural, because everything is affected by our culture and who we are, even when it comes to mental health. So with religion, mental health may be seen as a curse, as a punishment from God. You can pray it away. When you're depressed, you can pray, and then that depression would go. Or if the depression is not going, it means you're not praying enough. So the focus then comes on the individual, that it's your efforts that's kind of determining maybe how you're feeling or how you're dealing with any mental health issues that you're having. And then there is a shame, which is around how we view mental health. So oftentimes we see mental health as, let's say, the person like serious mental illness. So somebody who is suffering from psychosis or schizophrenia or bipolar, those, let's say, severe forms of mental health, versus looking at mental health on a spectrum, that this happens on a spectrum, that let's say you have a bad day, how are you feeling? That's still part of your mental health. Your emotions, which you cannot cut off, that's part of your mental health. Even your physical health, and your mental health, they kind of play a role, or they affect each other, that we don't see it that way. So then that also gets into it. So it's a whole bunch of complex issues. And then the other thing that oftentimes I see with the people that I work with is really the way our parents raise us. And that is like a big issue, that when you talk about it, it's like, oh, do you mean my parents are wrong and stuff like that? But it's really the way, some of the things, the pressure that's put, especially on immigrant children, some of the things that it's not allowed to talk about. Gender differences, some of the pressure that's put on women versus some of the pressure that's put on men, all those things, like men don't cry. The man has to be the one to provide. So whatever they have to do, they have to provide for the family or whatever it is. And then women are supposed to be this way, and all of that, all of those things play a role. So and I think we can have a whole conversation around that in of itself. So some of those things like religion, culture, the lack of education, or normalizing those conversations around mental health, and also sometimes really bringing it back to our community, that hey, this is already there. This is not something that, let's say, Western communities are making up and bringing it to you. But our ancestors already, they have these healing practices, or they have these practices that are already embedded in our community. So let's look at it as this way. This is not something that's so foreign to us.
Wow. Wow, you touched on so many things, and thank you for bringing some of those things up. And I love how you talked about we already have a lot of these practices that
Mm-hmm.
may not necessarily be defined as mental health care, but it's like
Mm-hmm.
the the result or the impact
Mm-hmm.
is the same, or at least the
Yeah.
intent is the same. So I love that
Mm-hmm.
you brought that up, because I think back, like every time I go home, there's always like, oh, this couple, they're having this issue. So it's like my grandma's getting ready to go with all the
Mm-hmm.
other family members. There's about to be
Yeah.
some sort of meeting or
Mm-hmm.
intervention to kind of
Mm-hmm.
chat through the issue,
Yeah.
problem solve,
Mm-hmm.
have both sides kind of chime in and talk about what's
Yeah.
going on. So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
we may not go to a therapist in those
Yeah.
instances, but
Mm-hmm.
it's like there's space that's created for those type of
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
conversations. So I love that you
Definitely.
pointed that out. And also like the shame and also just not talking about things, I think is something that's really common in a lot of our communities. It's like, especially now as I'm getting older, it's like the more I talk to like my mom and my grandma, I'm just learning all these things about our family. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, holy cow, like I didn't know,
Yeah.
like I didn't know any of these things. Like nobody ever
Yeah.
told me.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because it's like we just have this culture of like maybe, oh, when you're older, you'll understand, or like,
Mm-hmm.
certain things are kept from you and you just,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's interesting to, I think, grow up.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I love that especially younger people are more open to being at least just a bit more forthcoming or just transparent about what they're going through.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that's
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. And I think you made an interesting point that oftentimes when we talk about, oh, we don't talk about this, or that's also how we perpetuate generational trauma in families, that parents can say, oh, be home by 6, or don't go visit this person, versus really explaining it to that, okay, maybe I visited this person and this is what happened to me, so I don't want you to go there, versus don't do this. And then people may grow up with anxiety around things that they really don't understand. And then they would also pass it on to the next generation that, oh, in my family, we don't do this. And then the cycle of generational trauma keeps going on, versus somebody really explaining, this is why we don't do this, because maybe I spoke to this person and then this person hurt me. And then even sexual assault, a big thing that oftentimes when let's say children who have been sexually assaulted, when they have conversations with their parents, especially with their mothers, they also realize that their mothers have also been sexually assaulted, which is like a generational thing that happens in families. Also, when you sit and talk to parents, you realize, oh, so what I'm going through, you also went through the same thing, or you also had the same issues. So why are we all having the same issues? Is it a pattern of behavior that we are repeating in this family? Okay, now I can know that maybe I can break this pattern of behavior. Oftentimes we can say, oh, this is a curse when you bring religion into it. But oftentimes some of those things can also be really solved when you look at behaviors and the way you behave, and how some behaviors are embedded in families that everybody keeps on behaving the same way, where you don't even know why you're behaving in the same way, but you're doing it. Yeah.
Mm. Wow. Wow. And thank you for touching on generational trauma. That's something that I kind of wanted to touch on, or just like trauma in general.
Mm-hmm.
Could you help us first maybe define what exactly trauma is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's difficult to kind of define what trauma is, because what may be traumatic for me may not be traumatic for you. So it really depends on the person's subjective experience. So I would say any experience that leaves you feeling helpless, kind of your nervous system overwhelmed. Sometimes you could feel like you're cut off from humanity. So this connection, not really being yourself, can be a traumatic event. And then there are also situations where we know this is a traumatic event. So like it's situations like sexual assault, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, those things we know these are really traumatic events that could happen to a person, versus also things that could happen like a natural disaster. Racism, immigration can also be a traumatic experience for somebody, whether if even if a person volunteers to immigrate to another country, it could still be a traumatic experience for them to be removed from, or to go from a place where you know, or a place where you feel rooted, into a new place where you may not know anybody, you may not have a community. That in of itself could be a traumatic experience for the person. So experiences where we can say, oh, this is a good experience, could even be a traumatic experience for somebody because of the subjective experience, or the subjective effect, or how the person is responding to it. So some of trauma responses that maybe a person can experience could be hypervigilant. So you are always kind of really cautious. Sometimes you could be wary of the world, that somebody's out to get you, or things are going to go bad. Distrust in people. Always, there are people who describe themselves as, "Oh, I don't trust anybody." That is not like something to be celebrated. That is something that you have to really look at, because we are social beings, and we are made to relate to one another, and we are made to depend on one another. So if you don't trust somebody, why don't you trust somebody? What happened that you feel like you cannot trust anybody in the world? So some of those things, anxiety, always worrying about the future, what is going to happen? Is something bad going to happen to me? Sometimes aggression, just being really approaching life in like an aggressive way, or being angry all the time, that you're always angry at something. All of those things could be trauma responses. Yeah.
Before we touch on like generational trauma, I'd
Mm-hmm.
love to talk about like just the immigration experience in
Mm-hmm.
general being traumatic inherently. I think that's something that is not talked about often,
Mm-hmm.
given especially, not everyone has the privilege of just, being able to somehow come here for work, through like a super official legal process, and then um they're maybe they're a doctor or some professional, and then they're able to kind of restart their lives. Like, I'd say the average person or the average immigrant is, leaving super, maybe more harsh conditions, or
Mm-hmm.
unstable conditions,
Mm-hmm.
maybe civil war or just political unrest. So
Mm-hmm.
just thinking through all of that, like that's a lot to deal with, and
Mm-hmm.
having to basically say goodbye to your family,
Mm-hmm.
maybe, seek asylum,
Mm-hmm.
somehow find your way, maybe into the US or another country.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's a lot
Yeah.
to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
How do you, I don't know if you can speak to like clients, obviously, who've had experiences like that, but how do you, I guess, help people process all of that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, so the thing is, with colonization, racism, discrimination, and all of those things, that oftentimes, and people may not even acknowledge this or recognize it. Often, most African immigrants, their form of immigration could be what could be termed as forced immigration. So when you talk to people and people are really honest with you, they will tell you that if I had a choice, I wouldn't leave my country. even if they have a good life, quote unquote. Often that good life also comes at a cost. So to think about that too. But even if they've made a life for themselves, or if they have a good life, they would tell you, if I had the choice, if I had, let's say, the things that I have here in America, the opportunities that I've had, I would not leave my home country. So that in of itself gives you a preview into what goes on in people's minds. And we are really not honest with each other, and to have those kind of conversations that this experience is difficult. And then when you come here, there are also people that make you feel like you should be grateful because you are in America. You should be grateful because somehow you don't belong here, but you are here. So the experience in of itself, to go from your country where, let's say, you have your family and all of that, to another country where there are times that people know that they may not see their family members again, that this is the last time they have seen them, because there are people who may come here with documents and people who may not come here with documents. So that also kind of exists on a spectrum of the experiences that people may go through. So let's say if it's somebody who is coming here without documents, they know that there is a probability that this home that they are leaving, this is the last time for them, that they may not see the people that they are seeing. People are leaving their children behind, they are leaving their spouses behind, they are leaving their parents behind, all of that, to come to this place. And there are people who have also come to America or other European countries where they don't know anybody. They have no family contacts, no friends, and all that they did is really survive on the street, and all of that. So the research shows that one of the most difficult times for a person who migrates is the first year, and they really go through like a period of depression where it's like you're really in a new country. Like, what are you going to do? Like, it's not like you get here and you have a job and you go to that job. Even if you have your papers, it doesn't happen that way. You have to go through a process to get a job. And then we also don't acknowledge the grieving process that comes with it. So when we talk about grief and mourning, it's not only people death that marks a period of mourning, but we also mourn things, situations, places, relationships. So this person has to kind of grieve, which also leads to the depression, this place that they've left behind. Now you have to, in a way, you're like a newborn child. You have to, people leave everything they know. So you have to now make a life for yourself, kind of rebuild yourself, rebuild your identity. For most African immigrants, this is the first time they are Black, or they are being categorized as Black. So they have to also deal with that identity, or take on that new identity, which some people avoid, some people deny, some people are angry about. So people have different reactions to it. So they have to take on this new identity of being Black in America, where in my country, I'm not Black, I'm a Khan, I'm a Kriapem. That's who I am. I don't have to think about being Black every day when I wake up, but now you have to think about being Black and everything that comes with it. So it's really a process of kind of rebirth, or people re-identifying themselves. So who are you going to be in this new country that you've come to, in terms of finances, your occupation, your social life, your family life, all of those things, you have to think about it. So that's really a tough process. And that in of itself is the trauma that comes with it, the hopelessness, the disconnection that people feel, these feeling like you have nothing to do. And then there is pressure from back home that you are here, you're making money. So now you have to support family. So people are really kind of suffering in silence, where people are not being really forthcoming about it. That in New York, if you look at some of the ways some immigrants are living, it's really, really sad to see that some of their lives. And you talked about maybe even a person who comes here as a doctor, they still have to kind of re-identify themselves or take on this new identity. And then if you're coming from a country that doesn't speak English, you have to learn English. So this, like I said, this is a conversation that you can have a whole episode on, because it's really complex and complicated, and we don't talk about it enough. And I think the reason why we don't talk about it enough, it's because of the atmosphere that immigrants have to be grateful for being here, for being able to come to this country. People are always reminding you that you are not an American, and that in of itself is a traumatic event, a traumatic experience, to think that, oh, I've worked so hard to kind of re-identify myself, to find my place here. But every time you speak, somebody's going to ask you, where are you from? And they're always reminding you that you're not from here, or they're always reminding you of what you've left behind. That this, and in a way of unconsciously also telling you that this may never be your home, or this may never be your place. And there is this concept called cultural homelessness, which immigrants experience a lot, where you don't feel at home, let's say in America, and then when you go back home, you also don't feel at home, because the place that you left is not the same as you left. So, you know, Ghanaians may say, oh, you're too Americanized. And then you come to America, where are you from? And then you're like, okay, culturally, you don't have a home. So that's the concept of also cultural homelessness.
Wow. 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 I've experienced that feeling, and I've heard lots of people, talk about that, but I didn't know there was a word
Mm-hmm.
to describe it, cultural homelessness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it's like here, I've been here for, over half of my life, but there's still times where I'm like, this, like something feels like it's missing.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I go back home, oh, the American, you're not Zambian,
Yeah.
girl,
Yeah.
bye.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, yeah, that like never really feeling like fully like rooted somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that I've
Mm-hmm.
been thinking
Yeah.
about. Um, but thank you for pointing out some of the struggles that, immigrants have, completely just uprooting their lives and,
Mm-hmm.
moving to a different country. For instance, in my case, my mom is the one that did a lot of that work. She's the
Mm-hmm.
one that
Yeah.
laid the foundation. She's the one that had to, start over.
Mm-hmm.
So just thinking through that, and how you said, like, people just say, like, what are you complaining about? Like,
Yeah.
you should just be
Grateful.
happy. Yeah, you should just be grateful and happy you're in
Yeah.
America. you
Mm-hmm.
know um I think that's something to really, really think about, because, a lot of times you do become that default breadwinner, not
Mm-hmm.
just for your immediate family, but
Mm-hmm.
extended.
Yes.
Everybody,
Yes.
is like, oh, yeah, we have this relative in America.
And I think when parents kind of sacrifice or go through that sacrifice, it then also it has a different implication for immigrant children to feel like the feeling of guilt or overachieving, that even when you start making money and you're spending it, you could feel guilty that, oh, I'm in a way I'm making more than my parents are making, and then I'm taking a vacation. Is this even really allowed, when maybe you've seen that your parents never took a vacation in their life, or the only vacation they would take is to go back home? And sometimes I'm like, that is not a vacation. Like, the only place is Ghana and America. Like, that is not a vacation. But it could bring that guilt, which immigrants, children of immigrants really talk about, that guilt, overachieving, feeling like they have to prove something, or feeling like, my parents made this sacrifice, so I have to make it worth it, or I have to do something to make sure that the sacrifice doesn't go to waste also. And there are parents that would also remind their children, which is another conversation too. They will remind their children of those sacrifices, and that also has implications for children as well.
I can imagine. um yeah, I mean, luckily my mom she's never really put that pressure on us.
Mm-hmm.
But I can totally see that being, a pressure that a lot of immigrant, kids feel,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
just because it's like, oh, they, poured so much into making sure
Mm-hmm.
I would be okay. Like, I either owe my family or I just, I don't know, owe society
Mm-hmm.
like all of this work and just
Yeah.
all of this effort.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure that's like a common thing. Um, and so before we move into like more of the Q&A portion, I'd love to touch on like generational trauma because
Mm-hmm.
that's a term that I recently, maybe the past 2 years, really got to understand. Um, how would you define that? And
Mm-hmm.
could you make it, I guess, like contextualize it in like the African African
Way.
experience or
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So when we really talk about generational trauma, it's also the research. Some of the research is also recent. There have been some debate, but the research is really pointing to that this phenomenon is real. So we can talk about the biological aspect of it, which people gravitate towards the biological side of things. So we can talk about the biological, the social, and then the emotional aspect of it. And also recognizing that there is a relationship between all these things, biology, emotions, and social as well. So trauma, what it does is it kind of affects a person to like a cellular level. So it kind of have impact on your hormones, the chemicals in your brain, cortisol, which also is like our stress hormones. So trauma has impact on all those things. Trauma also has impact on our nervous system. So a person's nervous system will be kind of overwhelmed, and you'll be in like a fight or fight mode all the time, which kind of then affect your cortisol. So you're always kind of making this stress hormones and stuff like that. So there is really like a biological aspect of it. So when it comes to generational trauma, there is this aspect of is it neurobiology? I'm not sure, but somebody can correct me. Um, and it talks about epigenetics. So, what some of the research is pointing out to that is that trauma can even have an effect on a person in vitro. So, if let's say a person is pregnant and they are stressed out or they are experiencing trauma, they can even pass it on to the baby that they are carrying. So,
Mm,
it's really like because of the stress hormones, because of maybe other things that, and the research is still ongoing that are happening. It has an impact on gene expression. So it doesn't really change your DNA, but it has an impact on the gene expression. So which means which genes to make the most, or which hormones to make the most, which hormones to make less of, and things like that. So that's really the biological level that when, let's say, when um, using like a person who is pregnant during their time of pregnancy, they are in fight or flight mode all the time. That could impact what hormones they are secreting to the baby. And that could also impact the hormones that the baby is secreting as well. So kind of like on like a simple or like a common level when we think about it that way. So in a way, that's how it's going to impact the baby. So all of us are made up of 50% of both of our parents also. So in
mm,
a way, when you think about it, we are also carrying some of our parents' trauma as well. They may not like physically say, oh, I'm passing it on to you, but in a way they've passed it on to us, that there are some things that we may even react to where we are like, why am I even reacting this way? Or
mm,
why am I being angry this way? And there is a book called It Didn't Happen to You. And it talks about some of these anecdotal family experiences that family go through where a person may feel a certain way. They're like, why am I being angry? Or why do I even hate this person's voice and stuff like that, where they've linked it to some of the generational things that happen. And then
wow.
when you come to, let's say, Black people or African people, when we talk about the legacy of colonization, the legacy of slavery. All of those things have an impact, because now when we talk about the social and the emotional aspect of it, it impacts how parents raise their children. Let's say during the era of colonization, people shouldn't be out by, I'm using an example of, let's say, 6 p.m. When you're out by 6 p.m., maybe something can happen to you. So that is a thing that a family may internalize, where in the family could be passed on that, oh, in this family, we don't go out at 6. Or in this family, we are afraid of snakes. Really, and in some families, they would say it that way, but it could be one family member who was afraid of snakes, and then they pass it on without really explaining. Now, when you see snakes, you are anxious, but a snake never attacked you. But in your family, that's the story that has been passed on, that we are afraid of snakes, or when you don't go out at 6. So let's say when you're out and it's 6 p.m., you could feel yourself getting anxious that something bad is going to happen, because this is the story that has been passed on in the family. Like, we don't go out at 6, or we don't go out past 6, or when you're out by 6, something bad is going to happen. So even if something bad doesn't happen, you have already created something bad happening to you by making yourself anxious, making yourself weary, and all of that. And then you could also pass it on to somebody, or because you had that experience when you were out by 6 and you were not really happy, you were anxious, you could also tell your children, we don't go out by 6, stay out past 6, because when I was out by 6, something, I wasn't really feeling happy, I couldn't put my hand on, but something bad was happening. So you're passing it. So that's some of the things that can happen, the biological aspect, and then the social and the emotional, how parents raise children, and some of the things that they pass on to children through socialization as well. So that's kind of, a simpler way to explain it. Yeah.
And even that example, I'm just thinking through, like, yeah, my grandma's always just been very strict. Like, that's just been her thing. Like, very strict. If you're staying at her house and you're a woman, like, you can barely, really leave the house without without a little bit of an argument, or a little bit of back and forth. But I guess it's important to think, like, okay, why exactly
yes
is she just been super strict? What happened? Maybe it's just she's trying to protect you from maybe something she experienced. Like, so that's an interesting thing to think about. Now we can move on to, I'd love to move on to some of the questions that people submitted. So shout out to everybody that submitted their mental health questions for Alice. So a couple of them are kind of similar. So I think I would love to touch on first the one that asks about, how do you deal with any sort of breakup that can impact your mental health in any way? That's a question that was asked. And then there was another question about changes in friendships, which I feel like kind of aligns, like breaking up or ending a romantic relationship or a friendship. So any thoughts on that?
So often when it comes to breakups, and breakups suck. So just to name it, people want to get through it because, they don't like the feelings that they may be feeling, or the things that they are experiencing. But the thing is, you cannot just get through it, or you cannot push it away. So the first thing is, you really have to let your emotions and the experience run its course. I don't have like a magic pill where I'm like, this is what you can do, and then everything will be okay. But you have to let it run its course, because again, we are talking about loss here. So you're grieving and you're mourning. So you have to allow yourself to really mourn, and everybody's different. So some people may say, oh, they would mourn a relationship in a day. And great, if that works for them, if they know themselves and they know what works for them, and they know that for them, taking a day is all that they need, that's great.
That's impressive.
That's what I'm saying. That's great for them. versus other people, it may take time, it may take weeks, it may take months, right? And when we grieve and when we mourn, it's not a destination where we can get to and be done. Even when we think about people that we've lost through death in our life, we don't get to a place where we forget about them. It's always there. It's always in the background. Sometimes the emotions could be stronger. Other times it could be in the background. You could still go through your life, and then you could hear a music and it will remind you of this friend, and you could feel yourself getting sad all over again. And oftentimes grief and loss and all of those things remind us that of our ability to love and to care about people and to care about friendships and stuff like that. The friendship may not have served us, or we are not at a place to be with those people, but to really acknowledge that this person meant a lot to me and I did really care about them. And I wish they are still in my life. Oh, I am disappointed that something may have happened for us to go our separate ways, to really be truthful to ourselves. And I think that's also one thing that we have to be transparent with ourselves, to even validate and acknowledge our own feelings. If nobody else is going to do it, we have to do it for ourselves. That yes, I'm sad, and I'm sad because I've lost somebody great. I've lost a great relationship. I've lost a great friendship. And oftentimes that really helps versus trying to push it away.
Mm.
So really acknowledging it, mourning it, going through the mourning process. So really going through the process. And then when you feel like you're in a place where maybe the emotions are not really stronger, you can really have time to be curious and reflect on this relationship.
Mm.
What led to the breakup, or what led to you and your friend going your separate ways? Initially there could have been a reason, but now as you have time to grieve and all of that, with nobody kind of asking you or judging you, to be really transparent. What really happened in this relationship that made it go wrong? What role did I play in it? Oftentimes
Mm.
relationships are between people, so even if it's a friend who is doing something bad to you, you may have played a role to it. And this doesn't include abusive relationship, because I know oftentimes when I say some of these things, people who are in abusive relationships, or people who abuse other people, may say, "Oh, this person made me abuse them." No,
Mm.
this is not what I'm talking about. But friendships and other relationships that go bad. So what is it that there was a thing that a person do, which people may say red flag, that you missed in the beginning, that you
Mm.
ignored? Was it because you were not really speaking up in the relationship and talking about your needs, telling this person that this is not what I want and stuff like that? And was it also that this person told you what they want and you were not maybe acknowledging it or really respecting
Mm.
their needs and stuff like that? So oftentimes we are always not the good people, because I know in our story we are always the hero in our story. And
Right.
we are always the victim. But when you really sit down, you don't have to tell anybody this, but to really kind of do an internal audit and really think that, did this person tell me that they don't like this behavior? Did I violate their boundary, which led to some of these things? So really think about it. What role did you play? What role did the person play?
Mm.
What did you learn about yourself through this relationship? Or what did this relationship come to teach you about yourself and all of that? So you can also reflect on that. So there is something to gain from that in that moment. Okay, and if there was a specific incident that happened, how may you have handled that incident differently should it happen again in another relationship? So, if let's say
Mm.
another relationship, a person tells you their boundary, how are you going to react to that? Or if let's say another relationship, whatever the person did, it happens again, or if that red flag happens again, what are you going to do with that? Are you still going to stay? Are you going to speak up and stuff like that? Are you going to communicate your boundary? And oftentimes people may want, especially in romantic relationship, you want to, we may have the tendency, especially women, to please in the relationship, that we don't really voice what we need.
Mm,
And I say to voice what you need right from the beginning so that the person has every information that they need in the situation, that they cannot say, you did not tell me. You did not tell me that blue is your favorite color. So to be really voicing your needs, or that, okay, this is what I need. I feel loved when maybe you send me flowers, when you send me a text before you go to bed, when you let me know where you are so that I'm not worried and stuff like that. To really, and the person can decide this is too much for me. I don't want to be with you. And then you know that you made your needs known to the person, and this person could not fulfill your needs versus really not communicating and expecting maybe people to read your mind or expecting
mm,
people to know. So all of those things, that things ending could also really be a time for great reflection and a time for self discovery as well. And then when it comes to friendships and stuff like that, we oftentimes we want to maintain friends, or there are people who pride themselves on, oh, I've been with this friend for 20 years, and they want to celebrate that.
mhm,
But we outgrow friends also.
mm,
That you could outgrow friends. You could get to a place where maybe you and your friend may have different values, or your life is going in directions where you feel like, okay, this doesn't support my well-being, or this doesn't support my mental health, that maybe I'm going to end this friendship. And one thing about life is also that change is always constant. So maybe I could break up with this friend today, and next year I could meet them and they're totally a different person, or we could come back together. So to make room for that also, that things doesn't have to be constant, or things doesn't have to be fixed, that you're allowed to change your mind, and you're allowed also to break up with friends. You can either break up with friends or reduce the amount of time that you spend with friends also. And then also that happens when people start therapy, which have kind of seen a lot, is they expect the people around them to change. But no, you are the one in therapy. The people around you are not in therapy. They are not on this journey with you. So they
mm,
are going to be the same people. Now you have to make that decision of what you're going to do with those people in your life, because they are not on this journey with you. They are their own people. They could decide if they want to go to therapy and change or whatever or not, but you are the one changing. So, what are you going to do with that change? Are you going to limit the amount of time you spend with them? Are you going to communicate some of these things, that okay, maybe I'm in this new space and this is what I need from my friend? Can you or can you not do it, and all of that, while also allowing grace, knowing that people are also going through things in their life also. So to know that, and for us also to be kind of really transparent with the role that each friend plays in our life. So there are
mm,
some friends that we all that they can do for us is for us to hang out with them. Like
mm,
you have that friend that you know, if I want to go to brunch and have a good time, this is the person that I'm gonna call on, because I know I'm gonna have a good time. And that's the role that they are playing in your life. And when
mm,
you know that, you know you cannot expect anything more than that from them. So one friend could not fulfill all your needs, which also comes to romantic relationships as well, that your partner cannot fulfill all your needs, which is why you need friends and you need community, even if you're in a romantic relationship, so that you know that there may be a day you need emotional support and your partner cannot be the one to provide that emotional support for you. So you go to that friend that you feel like, okay, this is the friend that could provide me that emotional support. This is the friend that if I need financial advice, I can go to. You know,
mm.
you have that one friend that cannot give you financial advice. They are there when you want to spend money. You're like, if I want to spend money, this is the person that I'm going to call to spend money with. So to know all of those things as well too, and that could help with the friendships and romantic relationships.
Yeah, so that was a great question. Another really good one we got was, how do you know when it's time to see a therapist?
Hmm. I think we often feel like something has to happen or there has to be like an incident which kind of push us to go into therapy, but you don't really have to wait for something to happen. And oftentimes, a thing happening is what lead people to therapy. But also, I think everyone deserves to kind of be curious about their life and to really think about your life, even if it's for a while, to be curious. Like, why do I do the things that I do? Or why do I even like the things that I like? Why do I behave in this way? To be really explore yourself. So you don't have to be really going through a serious mental illness or a mental illness before you could go to therapy. Some people do it as a prevention method. So they are there already. So just if something bad happens, they are already in therapy. So they already have the tools, have somebody to talk to. Some people do it as a maintenance. There are people who have been in therapy for years and they'll tell you, oh, it's not really bad. I think oftentimes once a person experiences a great relationship with a therapist, it becomes like, and now it becomes difficult to stop because now you know what it feels like to have this space where you can really talk about anything, where nobody's judging your thoughts, where you can pause and be like, oh, maybe the way I did this wasn't really right. I could have handled this differently, or next time I will handle this differently. So to really see the importance of it. So I would say to not really wait until something happens. If you work and you have insurance, some insurance companies do offer therapy as part of their insurance. You could look into that. So if you're in a financial space where you can afford it, take advantage of it and stuff like that. Also, for people who work, there is EPA that provides like 6 or 8 sessions. You can also take advantage of that and see what that's like, or if it's something you want to do or you want to include in your life. As we talk about self care, some people do it as a self care thing for them where, they take care of themselves. So every week, 45 minutes or an hour, that's the time for themselves and stuff like that. And like I said, once you develop a great relationship, because it's also a relationship. And sometimes you may go through a couple of bad therapists together with good ones. Sometimes your first one may be the best one, but people really see the importance of it. There are people who are like, oh, I've had people say, oh, my friend and I were having this conversation and I didn't want to respond until I talked to you and figure out the right answer to give. And I'm like, great. So really giving people like, okay, I can handle this differently. So let's put this on a pause because I want to come back and give you the correct answer. So really, I think to really just to take advantage of it and to not wait until something bad happens, because oftentimes then it may be a little late. It's not too late, but it may be a little late, because then you have to kind of get to a place of stabilizing your emotions and stuff like that, versus when you're already in it, you already have the tools and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important to know that it's not just something you seek when you're going through trauma, like
Mm-hmm.
in the middle of it. It's
Mm-hmm.
something that you can also do just for maintenance and just
Mm-hmm.
overall wellness. And therapy is not cheap.
Therapy is not cheap. And that is true as a therapist, because also therapists also have to make money and
Mm.
pay their rent. You cannot go to your landlord and say, I'm a therapist. So I'm a therapist, so let me live here for free. It doesn't work that way. So when it comes to money, a couple of things. I know there are people who may not be able to afford it, and we will come to that. But the first thing is, are you not, is that not part of your budget because you don't see the importance of it? That are you in a space to add it to your budget, but you feel like, oh, this is not important? Because I know when it comes to physical health, people would find the money for physical health. Even if the insurance doesn't cover it, they would find the means to cover it, or they will budget around it. So really thinking about your mindset around this, that is this something that you can include in your budget, because it's an investment that you're making in yourself. the result can impact all areas of your life. So when you think of that investment, where is it going to impact all areas of your life, your finances, your relationships, your physical health, even your productivity at work, and all of that? It can impact all of those areas of your life. So the return on investment is really great. It may not be concrete, something that you hold in your hand, but it's something that is internal that you feel. So to really think about that also.
Mm.
And for people who may not be able to afford it, like I talked about, some insurance companies would pay, and there are therapists who take some insurance. I take Aetna. I know other people who take United Health and stuff like that, so they would pay for it. And sometimes there may be a copay like $10, $20 or so. So that's also an option. There is also an option where therapists offer sliding scale also. So there are therapists who would have sliding scale options in their practice, and they will let you know the sliding scale as well. And I say to really, as a therapist, to really, I advocate for really paying therapists what you can afford and not trying to really lowball them. Because again, um, this is their profession as well. This is how they make their income or how they live. So if you're not paying them, you know you can afford more, and then you're on a sliding scale and you're not paying them, that's really a disservice to them. And also secondly, you are really taking the space on the sliding scale for somebody who may really need it also.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then there is this Open Path Collective. So it's also like an online space where you can go and find therapists who have sliding scale options. And then there are training institutes. So if you're in a place where it has training institute, or where they are training therapists or psychologists and stuff like that, sometimes interns offer services at a reduced rate or a free rate for folks as part of their training. So you may not be, let's say, working with an experienced therapist, you'll be working with a student, but it will be a student who is being supervised by an instructor or a trained therapist to provide either free services or at a reduced rate also. And then
Mm.
there are also nonprofits that provide therapy, and usually that often kind of depends on a social issue. So it may be for either immigrants or maybe people who have experienced intimate partner violence or domestic violence and stuff like that. And that could also be like a free option. And oftentimes with that, there may be a wait list for that also. But that can, so those are some of those options too. Yeah. And
Mm.
then there are kind of programs. I know some therapists have, they would do like a month group for folks just on a specific topic. So if you don't have the money for individual sessions, sometimes some of those groups could also be a good option, where maybe you're in a group with other people. And now with online or things being virtual, there are so many options out there for that. Mhm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alice, for all of those resources. I will be sure to include links to,
Mhm.
especially like Open Path and some of the other things that you mentioned. Um, yes, because it's, I think it's important to, if you, have the means to, kind of
Mhm.
figure out ways you can access,
Yeah. Mhm.
whatever sort of help or assistance you may need. Um, yes. And so the last question that we can address is, someone asked, or they said, I feel guilty for receiving anything from anyone. I feel like I
Mhm.
must earn. Why is this?
Okay. So, and I don't know, I don't have the context to this person's experience. So, how I'm going to answer this is also going to base on assumption. So when we think about the feeling of guilt or the emotion of guilt, it's when we have done something wrong that we feel guilty. And there is a reason why we feel guilty, because when if we don't have guilt, that means we'll all be going on around in the world doing whatever we like and not feeling any way about it. So guilt serves a purpose. Like all emotions, there is a purpose for all of them.
Mm.
So which then means that in a way there is the mindset or the notion that receiving help from people is wrong. um, and that can be a trauma response, that can be a learned behavior either from family or growing up what you saw around you. You could have picked up on that. That could be where some of those is coming from, that people are not helpful, or I cannot depend on people, or in order for somebody to help me, maybe they may want something in return. And again, it could be trauma responses and stuff like that. So to really be, let's say, be curious, like I said, I don't have enough context around it. So to be really, really curious that where is this mindset coming from? And maybe sometimes working with a therapist around that, because it may be deeper than what's on the surface, that you say, oh, I feel guilty for receiving help, or I feel like I have to earn help. That it may be deeper than that, to really interrogate it with a therapist around what's really going on in your specific situation.
Yeah. I hope the person that asked that is listening, and maybe they can take some time to do a little, like, reflection on where that
Mm-hmm.
might be coming from, or, if they are able to even talk to someone like a therapist about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Alice, for answering all those questions. Thank you to
You're
everyone that
welcome.
submitted them. And so, how do we learn more about your work? How do people get in touch with you if they want
Mm-hmm.
to possibly work with you or just learn more?
You can find me on Instagram, although I'm not always there, but you can find me on Instagram, Akosia Ode. So that's it. And then my company's Instagram page, Centering Wholeness Counseling. And then you can also go on the website, centeringwholeness.com. There it has some of the contact. If you want to send me an email and stuff like that, you can do it through the website. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. Yes, I'll be sure to include those links as well in the episode description. Thank you so much again, Alice. It was such a pleasure to
Yes, this
chat
was
with you.
great. Yeah, this was great. Thank you for having me.
Thanks again for tuning in. I hope you really enjoyed the episode. Be sure to visit centeringwholeness.com to connect with Alice and check out some of the other links included in the show notes for mental health resources that could be helpful. Before you go, be sure to rate the show and leave a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It really helps validate that Dear Diaspora content is great and that the podcast is worth a listen. So thanks to everybody that's left a review so far and given the show 4.8 stars on Apple Podcasts. I really appreciate it. If you haven't already, give Dear Diaspora a follow on Instagram at Dear Diaspora and join the podcast mailing list. All the links to do so are in the episode show notes, so check those out. Thanks again, and talk to you soon.